Some changes in life announce themselves with fireworks. Others just show up uninvited and sit down at your desk. It was 7:09 a.m. when I stepped into Halston and Drake's third-floor executive wing, just like I had nearly every weekday morning for the past 17 years. I wore my usual gray suit, the same one I had on during 3 separate rounds of company restructuring. It had seen me through tense boardroom standoffs, sleepless quarters, and one 3 a.m. emergency call from Zurich. It wasn't just a suit, it was my armor. But that morning, it didn't matter. The hallway lights buzzed overhead as I passed the closed office doors. Familiar, steady. My mind already racing through the payroll audit due by Friday. Then I turned the corner into the finance suite and stopped. Someone was already sitting at my desk. A young woman, early 20s. Maybe. She was leaning back slightly in my leather chair, scrolling through something on my monitor. She didn't hear me approach, not until I cleared my throat. She looked up, startled but quick to recover. "Oh, hi! You must be Briar," she said brightly, standing up. "Sorry, I didn't mean to start before you got your things out." Before I got my things out? My eyes darted to the screen. My desktop was open, my spreadsheets, my notes. The mug with the chip in the handle still sat beside the monitor. Nothing about this scene made sense. And yet, she smiled at me as if this arrangement had been explained long ago. I didn't move. Not yet. My fingers tensed slightly around the strap of my bag. A moment later, Martin Drake appeared behind me, Starbucks cup in hand, wearing that effortless, smug grin I'd grown used to seeing in investor meetings. "Briar, good. You're early," he said, like I hadn't been arriving at 7:09 a.m. for nearly 2 decades. "This is Emery, my niece. Just graduated Duke. She's shadowing the finance team this quarter." Shadowing? No email, no meeting invite, no heads up, just, here she was. I looked back at her, still standing beside my chair, shifting slightly in her heels. The gray suit on my shoulders suddenly felt heavier, and deep down, something in me knew this wasn't a shadow. This was a replacement. They just hadn't said the words yet. It landed in my inbox at 5:42 p.m., just as I was about to shut down for the day. The subject line read, "Change in organizational structure." No name, no greeting, just a cold body of text that could have been written by a bot. Or worse. A board intern, effective immediately. Your position has been dissolved due to internal restructuring. Please arrange to return all company-issued devices by end of business tomorrow. This decision is final and not subject to appeal. There will be no severance payout associated with this transition, no explanation, no thanks. Not even a sentence acknowledging the 17 years I had poured into that place. I stared at the screen, frozen. The office around me had already gone quiet. I hadn't noticed the others slipping out. Maybe they knew. Maybe they'd known before I did. I packed my things in silence. I didn't touch the coffee mug with the chipped handle. I just left it, along with the stress ball shaped like a globe that someone gave me during the 2015 trade show, and the framed photo of me standing with the old CFO, smiling in front of a whiteboard covered in survival plans for the company during the post-crisis era. I walked out without looking back. By 6:07 p.m., I was sitting in my car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. The lot was mostly empty, just a few tired sedans catching the last rays of sunlight. I sat there, seatbelt still fastened, hands resting on the steering wheel. The building loomed in front of me, windows glowing orange as the sun dipped lower, office lights flicking off floor by floor. I remembered a night in October 2011, sitting in the same parking lot with my carry-on suitcase, canceling my honeymoon over speakerphone while waiting for the emergency flight to Zurich. Currency crash, frozen liquidity. They needed someone they trusted. And I went. Then there was December 2017. I postponed surgery, an outpatient procedure I'd put off for years, because year-end reports had to be finalized before the board meeting. The pain wasn't as urgent as the numbers. All of that now boiled down to one sentence. No handshake, no thank you, no exit meeting. I reached for my phone, opened the employee portal on instinct, but when I typed in my login credentials, the screen flickered once, then returned. User not recognized. Confused. I opened the internal directory. My name wasn't there. It hadn't just been locked, it had been deleted. I refreshed. Just to be sure. Still nothing. They'd erased me before they'd even told me I was gone. That was the moment the pain hit. Not because I was unemployed. Not even because I'd lost the job. But because, for them, I had never existed at all. By the time I got home that evening, I was too numb to feel angry. The pain hadn't faded. It had simply shifted, settled somewhere deeper, quieter, like a hairline crack running through concrete. I didn't turn on the TV or open a bottle of wine. Instead, I went straight to the old bookshelf in my study and reached for a black external hard drive that hadn't seen the light of day in over a year. It clicked to life when I plugged it into my personal laptop. I waited. Fingers still, eyes locked on the screen. I knew exactly what I was looking for. After the 2015 currency fraud scare, I'd created a structural blueprint of Halston & Drake's internal financial system, every digital pathway, every approval layer, every trapdoor built for crisis. The final version had never made it into the official documentation. Martin had said it was too technical for the board, and I had let it go. But I'd kept my own copy. Clean. Legal. Mine. I opened the folder marked ELB, Emergency Liquidity Bridge. It was the system I designed when we almost lost $42 million in a cross-border freeze. It rerouted essential funds through a back-end protocol if the primary account holder was compromised or removed without proper authorization. That happened once. In 2019, during a ransomware scare, I was able to override the block using an administrative ghost account I'd created, one that only I knew existed. Username, Winstein B. It was named after my grandfather. Winston, an accountant, a war veteran, and the man who taught me how to double-check everything. I opened a secure terminal window and typed in the credentials from memory. One blink, then another, finally. The line lit up green. Admin Winston B. Activity dormant, 162 days. Status, active. They hadn't touched it. They hadn't shut it down. They didn't even remember it was there. I exhaled slowly, not in triumph, but in clarity. For all their spreadsheets and suits, they'd forgotten the architecture, the very bones of the system. I hadn't just maintained that infrastructure. I had designed it. I knew where the override points lived, where the audit flags would trigger, and how long a transaction would hang in limbo if certain permissions were revoked. And now, I still had those permissions. I clicked through a few internal test scripts, nothing invasive, just pings. The system was still listening, still loyal. Martin and his board may have deleted my name from the employee directory, but they'd never revoked my secondary access. I was invisible now, but not powerless. As I reviewed the schematic, my eyes landed on a note I'd written in 2017. In case of unauthorized purge, ELB will hold high-value transactions in suspension until dual authentication confirms legitimacy. Back then, that line had been a footnote. Now, it was leverage. I closed the screen and leaned back in my chair. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had taken on a new shape. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to wait. And if they pushed me again, I would pull the lever they forgot existed. The silence in the room was complete. Not cold, not bitter, just focused. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was restoring balance. They thought they had locked me out, but the back door was still open, and I was the one who wrote the code. I wasn't expecting a message from her. In fact, I nearly deleted it before opening, but the subject line stopped me cold. I didn't know. It landed in my inbox at 8:31 a.m., less than 12 hours after I confirmed I still had ghost-level access to the company's emergency financial systems. I hadn't touched anything, not yet. I'd gone to sleep with the quiet knowledge that if I needed to, I could still pull a lever no one remembered existed. I didn't need complications. I needed time. And then Emery Drake emailed me. The name alone made my shoulders tense. But when I clicked into the message, something unexpected happened. I felt myself pause, not out of suspicion, but out of something I couldn't quite name. The first line read, "I thought I was shadowing you. I didn't know I was replacing you." She went on. "They told me you had moved to a consulting role, that I was coming in to help modernize the documentation. I didn't even realize I was sitting at your desk until one of the team leads said your name and looked confused. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Not yet. The email continued, explaining that something hadn't sat right with her since that first day. She said there were files, financial ones, already queued in her inbox before she'd even received her access credentials. That she was being asked to approve large transfers without full context. That she was being told to sign things under pressure. Why, I know I'm new and young, but I'm not stupid. Attached was a screen recording. No narration. Just a direct capture of her desktop from the day before. A contract filled the screen, labeled Pre-Investment Agreement, Level C Clearance Required. The receiving party was a company I'd never heard of. The originator, Martin Drake. But the signature block? It was empty. Seconds into the video, Emery's cursor hovered over the signature field. A male voice, Martin's, spoke off camera. "Just authorize it. It's routine. We batch these. No one reviews until quarterly close." My eyes narrowed. Emery didn't sign in the recording. She hesitated. The mouse lingered, then pulled back. That alone told me something real. I had seen interns cave faster under far less pressure, but she hadn't. Then came the part that made me sit upright. She paused the video, clicked into a secondary page titled Investment Holdings, Beneficiary Detail, and scrolled to the bottom. The listed beneficiary wasn't Martin, or Emery, or anyone from Halston and Drake. It was a name I didn't recognize at all. Patricia Wells. No title, no department. Just a name. I opened my private backup terminal and ran a soft lookup through the ghost directory. No Patricia Wells had ever been registered, contracted, or consulted with Halston and Drake. She didn't exist, not in any legitimate way. I returned to Emery's message. Her final line hit differently. "They asked me to authorize in her name. I've never met her." I leaned back in my chair. The email still open on my screen. I didn't know whether I was looking at a genuine plea for help or the setup to a larger game. Maybe Emery had found herself tangled in something she didn't understand. Or maybe she was being used, just like I had been, just for different ends. Still, there was one thing I couldn't ignore. She had given me a thread, and whether she knew it or not, I now had something to pull. I didn't reply. Not yet. I downloaded the video, stored it under a locked folder labeled Flagged Evidence, Level 2. Then I opened a blank document and began a list titled Unauthorized Entities, Internal Risk. At the top, Patricia Wells. I hadn't moved yet, but the structure was shifting. Martin's hands weren't just dirty, they were soaked. And Emery? She was holding the match he never meant to drop. The name Patricia Wells wouldn't leave my mind. And if Emery had handed me a thread, it was time to see where it led. I logged back into the system just after 9:04 a.m., using the same ghost account I'd activated the night before, Winston B. The interface was outdated, but familiar. I bypassed the standard dashboard and navigated to the staged transactions archive, a holding area where high-value transfers remained pending until final audit approval. It didn't take long. The second transaction on the list froze me. Transaction ID, ZQ4592, GEN, date April 14th, 2023. Beneficiary, Patricia Wells. Amount, $1,912,000 USD. Destination, Heliotech Partners, AG, Geneva, Switzerland. Notes, strategic acquisition, approved. I clicked into the attached documentation. A 2-page investment agreement opened, standard corporate boilerplate, but the details were off. Too vague, too clean. And at the top, stamped in red, audited, cleared for transfer. But something was missing. There were no authentication tags, no digital trail, no approval metadata. That was the first red flag. Then I scrolled to the bottom. The last page displayed the signature section. There it was, my name. Prepared by Briar Winslow. Director, Global Treasury, approved by M. Drake. And directly beneath my printed name was my signature. Except it wasn't. It looked like mine. Yes. Same looping B, same angled flourish at the W. But I knew this signature. I'd seen it before, because I'd signed it 2 years ago on a Q1 tax compliance memo. I pulled that file up from my own archive, side by side. The signatures were identical, pixel for pixel. They hadn't just copied my signature, they'd scanned it, reused it, forged it. I stared at the screen, a cold wave rising in my chest. Not quite rage, not quite grief. Something in between. It wasn't enough to erase me. They'd weaponized me, used my name to authorize something I'd never seen, never touched. My thoughts drifted back to April. That month. Martin had breezed past my desk and said something casual, almost forgettable. We've got Geneva sorted, should be finalized this week. I hadn't paid it much attention. At the time, I'd been knee-deep in onboarding documentation, and no one had asked me to review or approve any acquisition files, because they didn't need me to. They already had my signature on standby. I sat back, hands folded tightly together, feeling the pressure build behind my ribs. Not from panic, but from clarity. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't lazy record-keeping. It was deliberate. A paper trail of half-truths and placeholders. Meant to look legitimate from a distance, but completely hollow underneath. I downloaded the PDF and saved it to an encrypted folder I'd labeled Level 3, Forgery Indicators, under a new subfolder titled Heliotech Transaction. I logged the details: transaction ID, date, amount, endpoint, and the forged signature reference. I added a note for myself at the bottom: origin of beneficiary unknown. No HR or tax ID match. Potential proxy identity. Risk, high. Closing the screen. I let the silence settle. The walls of my study felt smaller than usual, more intentional, like the inside of a control room instead of a home office. The light shifted across my desk, cutting clean through the dust in the air. I didn't call anyone, I didn't shout. I just stared at the blinking cursor on my screen and thought, they trusted my name enough to fake it. Let's see how they handle the real thing. They thought removing me from the system had ended my influence, but now that same system held proof of their fraud, with my name attached. I wasn't erased. I was still in the infrastructure, and they had just reminded me exactly how much power that held. They forged my signature, but left my design untouched. That was their mistake. I didn't storm into a lawyer's office or threaten to go public. I didn't need to. What I needed was already sitting on my hard drive, written in code, wrapped in compliance protocols. Protocols they never bothered to dismantle when they erased me. So I opened the file labeled RBVT2, short for Request for Beneficiary Validation, Tier 2. It was a procedure I'd built 5 years ago, during the overhaul of our cross-border audit system. It required that any transaction exceeding $500,000 be routed for additional identity verification if the listed beneficiary didn't match our internal HR or vendor registry. It was considered standard, almost invisible, but it had teeth. Once initiated, the transaction was placed on administrative hold until a certified response came from the receiving bank. I filled out the request. Transaction ID ZQ4592, GN beneficiary, Patricia Wells. Reason for flag: unverified identity, No internal record, signature inconsistency noted, attached documentation, supporting PDF marked as forged with 99.87% match confidence from internal scan log. The response time for these requests could vary, anywhere from 48 hours to 2 weeks. But while the timer ran, the money couldn't move. No exceptions. Not even for Martin Drake. I encrypted the request with a dual-layer cipher, another piece of legacy code I'd left behind when I upgraded the compliance firewall in 2020. The outer shell looked like a standard audit form. The inner shell, however, held an internal access log cross-referencing signature timestamps with user login sessions. It proved that the signature on the Geneva transaction had been reused from a prior file. Not altered, not retyped, recycled. I submitted the file through the system's external verification portal and waited for the confirmation ping. It came back 5 minutes later. Request received and routed to Compliance Officer Caleb Morton. And that's when the twist landed. Caleb. I hadn't seen his name in years. We'd worked side by side during the 2018 restructuring crisis. I was his direct supervisor for a while. But more importantly, I'd stood between him and a quiet dismissal when the board wanted someone to blame for a reporting delay. Caleb was young, brilliant, and cautious. 3 things Martin never liked. I made sure he stayed. After the confirmation, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. Got your file, I'll run it through personally. Good to see your name again. No smiley face, no emojis, just clean, respectful clarity. That was Caleb. Still the same. I didn't respond. But for the first time in days, I felt something subtle shift under my skin, like pressure adjusting in a sealed room. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't hacked or sabotaged. I'd simply used the system I created for moments exactly like this. Martin wanted to use my name to authorize a fraudulent transfer. I used his infrastructure to pause it. Legally, quietly. And the best part? If anyone looked into the hold, all they'd find was a compliance request, a standard form, a security measure introduced 5 years ago by a former director of Treasury. Nothing malicious, nothing confrontational, just inconvenient. Very, very inconvenient. I refreshed the portal again. The transaction's new status blinked back at me. On hold. Awaiting identity validation. That hold could last days, maybe longer, especially if the bank had additional questions, especially if Caleb took his time, and I suspected he would. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the screen, fingertips resting lightly against each other. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt sharp, alive, like the inside of a blade. They'd used my silence as permission, my absence as opportunity, but I was still here, still in the system, and now the system was listening again. They built the trap with my tools. I just remembered where the switch was. I hadn't expected a thank you. I certainly didn't expect another message from Emery, but this one changed everything. It arrived late in the afternoon, just as I was rereading my notes on the Geneva transaction. Unlike her last email, this one had no attachments, no subject line designed to draw me in. It was short, hesitant, even. But what it revealed was something I never saw coming. I think I understand now why I was chosen. It wasn't about what I know. It was about how I look. Martin needed a fresh face to pitch to Durham Fields. He said investors trust someone who hasn't been corrupted by old corporate tricks. That's why he wanted me to smile and stay vague. I stared at the screen, lips tight. Durham Fields. That name hadn't crossed my mind in years, but it struck like a match to dry timber. 3 years ago. I met Fields during a closed-door investment summit in New York. He was different from the other suits. He didn't bluff or brag. He didn't smile unless he meant it. And he didn't tolerate incompetence. I'd gone into that meeting expecting to speak for 5 minutes, but we talked for over an hour about financial integrity, institutional fatigue, and the dangerous glamorization of new blood without experience. At the end of the meeting, he slipped me his card and said one thing I've never forgotten. If you ever get tired of carrying a company on your back while someone else cashes the check, call me. I never called. Back then. Loyalty still meant something. I believed Martin had a long game I could be part of. I believed Emery hadn't been born yet into the space I'd built. I was wrong on both counts. Emery's email continued. When I sat down in Field's office yesterday, I saw something. A clear glass tray on the corner of his desk. Inside it, a few pens, and your name card, just yours. I don't know what it means, but I thought you should know. I read that line 3 times. The idea that Fields had kept my card, through all this time, through my erasure, was both surreal and strangely comforting. In a world where most people forget you the second your ID badge stops scanning, someone had chosen to remember. I opened the drawer to my right and pulled out the very same card he had given me. It had lived in that drawer for 3 years. Untouched. The paper still crisp. The ink still sharp. It read, Durham Fields, Founding Partner. High-water strategic. I set it on my desk and stared at it for a long time. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. My mind drifted back to that meeting, to the way Fields listened, never interrupting, occasionally scribbling a note. His questions sharp but fair. He was the kind of person who never needed to raise his voice. His silence did the work, much like the silence I had chosen. Until now, I opened a blank draft. 2 d.fields@highwaterstrategic.com. Subject, Re. A familiar name. Durham, you once said to reach out when I was tired of carrying the weight. I suppose this is me reaching out. Best. Briar Winslow. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, I saved the draft, closed the laptop gently, and leaned back. Something inside me had shifted. Not entirely forward, but no longer frozen. The possibility that I wasn't invisible after all, that someone still saw me, not as a ghost, but as a strategist, a leader, a force. That spark was enough. For now. Before I made a call, I wanted to see how much damage a little silence could do first. Hope is a powerful thing, but it's not a strategy. Not yet. Before I reached out to Durham Fields, I needed to make sure Martin couldn't move a single dollar without tripping over me. The moment Emery told me my name still sat on Fields' desk. Something shifted. I wasn't erased. I was remembered. But memory alone doesn't stop transactions. So I turned back to what I knew best. Structure, code, control, safe gate layer protocol. It was a security measure I'd embedded into the core of our international transaction system during my tenure. On the surface, it looked like a passive audit flag. In practice, it was a gatekeeper, quiet, automatic, and unforgiving. Every transaction over $10,000 could be held for manual review if certain internal conditions were met. Those conditions? Designed and hard-coded by me. Conditions that hadn't been changed since. I logged into the old administrator shell using my ghost profile. Winstein D. My fingers barely hesitated on the keys. The interface loaded like it had never been interrupted. I navigated to the override console, entered the command line, and activated the lock trigger. Set transfer ceiling, $10,000. Enable autoflag, all recipients tagged new vendor or non-domestic. Status, active hold, manual review until third-party validation complete. Then came the final sequence. Voice print verification. The system prompted me to read a phrase I'd personally written back in 2019. Integrity is silent structure. I said it aloud. A soft beep. Then the screen blinked green. Safe gate initiated. All qualifying transactions will be routed to Tier 3 audit. No internal override allowed. I didn't smile. But I did breathe deeper. Now for the second step. I composed a report, not dramatic, not accusatory, just technical. It listed recent anomalies, flagged the Geneva transaction, and requested external review under Clause SG Audit. Level Red. I left no sender name, just a metadata stamp. The request was routed to Third Gate Compliance Group, the firm we'd contracted years ago for silent escalation reviews. By 10:02 a.m., I had confirmation that the report had been received. By 10:15 a.m., the system had synchronized. By 10:30 a.m., the first ripple hit. It couldn't have been timed better. At that exact moment, Martin was in the executive boardroom, finalizing a new partnership with a Singapore-based venture group. The deal? A $4.6 million equity exchange. The funds were scheduled to be transferred by 11 o'clock a.m., directly from Halston & Drake's Swiss reserves. The moment the transaction was pushed through, it bounced back, flagged, held, blocked. No reason listed. Just a notification. Transfer on hold, pending external identity validation. By 11:12 a.m., my inbox, linked anonymously to SafeGate alerts, received a passive copy of the failed attempt. By 11:14 a.m., a new alert came in. Attempted override denied. No valid user authorization. Martin was trapped, and he didn't even know who had built the cage. The Third Gate audit team would respond within 72 hours. Until then, the money couldn't move. Not a cent. And because I had submitted the trigger as a silent systems protocol, no one internally could reverse it without breaching compliance policy. I leaned back, stared at the code, and whispered, "You wanted to move fast. Martin, I just slowed the ground beneath your feet." I didn't hack anything. I didn't break a law. I followed the rules, his rules, the ones I'd once written in his name. And now, the same structure he'd forgotten was operating exactly as designed. I watched the logs continue to ping. More blocked transactions, more confusion. Eventually, someone would start asking why. But they wouldn't find a villain. They'd find a protocol, a ghost in the code. And Martin? He'd be the one explaining to investors why their money wasn't going anywhere. He used my name to move money. I used my silence to stop it. And now, the questions were starting to echo. I didn't stick around to watch him unravel. I didn't need to. That morning, I had somewhere more important to be. At 6:12 a.m., I stepped through the sliding glass doors of Terminal B at Lambert International. Suitcase in tow, blazer neatly folded over one arm. The sun had just started to rise, casting long amber stripes across the polished floor. I walked past the coffee stand, past the business travelers glued to their laptops, and headed toward Gate 32. My flight to California, non-stop to Santa Clara, was boarding in just under an hour. I wasn't flying for vacation. I was flying for a conversation that had been waiting 3 years to happen. But before I reached security, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. One voicemail. Unknown number. But the area code was familiar. Local. I put in an AirPod, stepped aside, and hit play. Martin. "Briar, please. Look, I don't know what this is about, but this isn't necessary. Let's just talk. Call me back, okay?" The message ended with a nervous breath, like he'd been holding it in the entire time. I stood still for a long moment, watching a janitor mop near the windows, a mother trying to calm her restless toddler. Normalcy, uninterrupted by panic. I replayed the message. Once, then again. Gone was the executive who once cut me out of budget briefings. Gone was the man who'd smiled as he introduced his niece as a fresh face. This voice? It cracked. I didn't call him back. Instead, I archived the voicemail under a new folder I'd just created. When the walls crack. Let the record show, silence wasn't passive. It was precision, and this time, it was mine. I moved toward the gate, passing through TSA pre-check with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. As I waited for my bag, another notification pinged onto my screen. This time, a text from Emery. He just asked me something insane. If I could, forge your signature for a retroactive file. I said no. I exhaled, not in surprise, but in confirmation. He was spiraling. The Geneva transaction was frozen, and he still didn't know how or why. His investors were calling. His legal team was stalling, and now, desperate, he turned to the one person he thought he could still control, Emery. But even she had drawn the line. I typed back, "You did the right thing. Now step back and stay out of his fire." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. That was enough. As I made my way to the boarding area, I played Martin's voicemail one last time, not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to remember the tone, the trembling at the edge, the realization in his voice that whatever was happening, he no longer had control. "This isn't necessary," he'd said. But of course, it was. Necessary for every email he ignored, every suggestion he dismissed, every year he smiled while making me invisible. He didn't see it coming because I never raised my voice, but I'd built the floor he stood on. And now, I was taking my name off the blueprint. I looked out the window as a plane taxied by, its engine hum low and steady, somewhere in a corner office. Martin was probably pacing, calling it compliance, even legal, none of whom could explain why the system was rejecting every major transfer. Because it wasn't a glitch, it was a gate, a lock, a decision made long ago, designed to activate under one condition, when someone tried to misuse what I had created. That condition had been met. As I stepped onto the plane and settled into seat 4A, I pulled out a slim folder from my carry-on. Inside, my original architecture notes for SafeGate, a printed copy of the Geneva transaction audit, and, just in case, Durham Field's business card. I hadn't sent the email yet, but I would. Soon. For now. I let the engines roar beneath me and closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exact. He used my silence as space to erase me. I used that same silence to rebuild the walls around him, one trigger at a time. He wanted to bury me in quiet. I let that quiet spread, until it echoed loud enough to shake his foundation. While I flew west, the boardroom on the 17th floor began to crack. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. By the time my flight passed over Nevada airspace, the air inside Halston and Drake's executive conference suite was already shifting, tight, brittle, and growing warmer by the second. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. On the surface, it was just another quarterly presentation. In reality, it was Martin Drake's final attempt to hold the reins in front of their largest private investor, Durham Fields. The same Fields who, less than 12 hours earlier, had been forwarded a flagged notification from Third Gate Compliance. Martin entered the room with his usual bravado, a slight smile, crisp suit, pages of color-coded graphs, ready to impress. He opened with well-rehearsed notes, recent acquisitions, projected cash flows, international growth pipelines, and then came the Geneva deal. "The funding is secured and already scheduled for transfer," Martin said confidently, gesturing to the chart projected behind him. But when one of the board members asked to see the live wire confirmation, his assistant hesitated. She stepped forward, holding a printed sheet, and that's when the first crack showed. The in-transit field was blank. The transaction status read, "Pending, external hold, identity verification required." Martin cleared his throat, tried to move on. But Fields raised a hand. He didn't speak loudly. He never had to. "Before we go further," he said, "I'd like clarity on 3 items." Martin nodded, uneasily. "First," Fields began, "can you verify the current liquidity position of the Swiss reserve account?" Martin shifted in his chair. "It's intact," he said, "though there's been a small delay, likely a compliance bottleneck." "Second," Fields continued, "who approved the Geneva transaction internally?" Martin paused. "It went through all required channels." "I asked who," Fields said. Voice sharper now. Martin looked toward his assistant, who whispered something inaudible. He turned back to the room. It was logged under Briar Winslow. Silence. She's no longer with the company, he added quickly. The paperwork was finalized before her departure. Fields looked down at the folder in front of him, flipping to a flagged page. Yet this contract is dated April. Your HR records show she was terminated in May, and the signature, he held up the page, is a recycled scan, not authenticated. Martin opened his mouth, closed it. Third, Fields said, setting the paper down. Who is currently responsible for overseeing compliance at this level? Martin straightened. That role has been absorbed into general operations. Fields raised an eyebrow. So, no one. Tension rippled through the room. A few board members exchanged glances. One scribbled something in the margin of their agenda packet. Another leaned toward the legal counsel at the end of the table. Martin tried to pivot. Look, the systems are stable. The protocols are just temporarily overcorrecting due to outdated flags. We'll reset permissions by end of week. But Fields wasn't listening anymore. His gaze had gone still, calculating. Finally, he spoke. I'd feel more secure with someone who built the house watching the locks. No one said a word. The message was clear, and it didn't require a motion or a vote. One of the compliance officers coughed lightly. Another board member said, almost under his breath, "Didn't she design the SafeGate protocol herself?" Martin didn't respond. He didn't have to. The moment had passed him. By the end of the meeting, Fields and two other investment partners had formally requested a full compliance reassessment of all pending disbursements over $500,000. Until then, all large-scale transfers, including Geneva, would remain frozen. Someone suggested appointing a temporary external advisor. Someone else said, "We need someone who understands the system better than it understands itself." No one mentioned Martin's name again. Somewhere above the Rockies, I received the push notification. Internal. Board has called for Tier 3 compliance reevaluation, Q3 disbursements under audit. I didn't smile, but I closed my laptop with purpose. They had erased my name from the door, but now they were circling back, searching for the person who could steady the foundation they'd cracked. I reached for my notebook and began drafting a proposal titled Temporary Compliance Intervention Program. Drafted by B. Winslow, sometimes. Power doesn't come from speaking the loudest in the room. Sometimes it's built, quietly, into the walls. They tried to erase me from the building, but the foundation still bore my initials. I hadn't heard from Emery since her last text, but 2 days after the board meeting, a small padded envelope appeared on my doorstep. No return address. No sender name. Just Briar Winslow. Handwritten and soft. Careful script. I recognized the loops in the R immediately. Inside, wrapped in a folded sheet of plain ivory paper, was a single USB drive. No instructions. No note. Just silence. Carefully packaged. I closed the blinds in my study, powered up my laptop, and slipped the drive into the port. The folders opened quickly, cleanly. Someone had organized them with precision. There were 4, each labeled with a date and a title. The top-level folder simply read, For Briar. The first file I opened was a spreadsheet, an internal transaction log. It matched what I had already seen in the system. But this version had something more. Column notes Emery had added in bold red. Signed under pressure. Pushed through without full review. Martin said it was urgent. The second folder held email chains. The subject lines alone told their own story. Just sign it and send. Don't stall this. Need this done by Cobb. No questions. This is above your clearance level. Just process. Each one bore Martin's name. Most were sent after 10:00 p.m. Some were flagged high priority, even when the request violated company process. The third folder was harder to open. It contained audio, short recordings, less than 2 minutes each. Emery had started discreetly recording her one-on-one conversations. There was one where Martin's voice said, "Your family, you want to make me proud, don't you?" Another where he added, "Briar was too cautious. That's why we kept stalling." And another, darker one, "If Briar finds out, she'll bury this place. That's why you're here, to look forward, not back." I paused the audio halfway through. I sat there for a long time. Then I opened the final file. It was a letter, handwritten, scanned, titled simply, "Resignation." Dear Briar, I thought taking this job meant proving I was smart, proving I could belong at the table. But I understand now that being smart doesn't mean being silent when something feels wrong. You didn't deserve what happened to you. I didn't understand at first. But I do now, and I don't want to be a part of it. I've officially resigned. I'll be leaving town by the weekend. I'm sorry for sitting at your desk before I even knew your name. I see it now. That seat was never mine to begin with. Thank you for how you handled me, even when I didn't know better. Emery, I sat back, the letter still glowing on the screen, my hands resting gently on the edge of the keyboard. She didn't have to send any of this. She could have disappeared, kept her head down, and waited out the chaos. But instead, she had chosen to burn the bridge behind her, not in rage, but in truth. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. And then, the twist. At the bottom of the letter was a single link. Last file, truthvideoclip.mp4. I clicked. The video began in low resolution. It was a phone recording, clearly taken without permission, angled just over the edge of a desk. Martin's voice came through, unmistakable. "She's too old to be taken seriously. Even if she caused trouble, no one would believe her now. She had her time. It's ours now." Silence followed. Silence. And then, the image of Emery, still and wide-eyed, holding the phone in her lap. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I'd heard worse behind closed doors. But seeing it confirmed, watching how casually he dismissed me, how surgically he replaced me, not because I was incapable, but because I was inconvenient. It didn't hurt. It clarified. Martin never saw my legacy as a living system. To him, I was just a seat to be filled, a name to erase. But Emery had learned something even I hadn't expected. She saw the architecture, the intent behind the structure. She had finally chosen to leave, not because she was scared, but because she'd outgrown the role he forced her into. I drafted a reply. It didn't need to be long. You didn't sit in my seat. You were shown a version of it that never fit you either. You found your own voice. That's the one that matters. Thank you for walking away, for both of us. Briar, I sent it. Closed the window. Then backed up the USB contents into an encrypted folder labeled Legacy, Proof, and a Transition. They picked her to replace me, but she'd replace them instead, with integrity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a successor can do is refuse the throne altogether. 2 weeks later, I arrived in Zurich, not as the woman they let go, but as the one they never truly saw coming. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Dernberg Zurich Trust at 12:02 p.m., wearing the same gray suit they'd quietly replaced, the same one I wore the morning Emery sat in my chair. It fit differently now, not tighter or looser, but heavier, with memory and meaning. The receptionist stood when I approached. "Ms. Winslow," she said with a respectful nod. "Mr. Fields is waiting upstairs." No ID was required, no explanation asked. My credentials had already been uploaded into the system, full access under a newly created role. Chief Strategic Compliance Advisor. They knew I was coming. I followed a quiet assistant to a secured conference room on the 12th floor. The view was floor-to-ceiling glass, framed by the snowy edge of the Alps. And there, standing beside a polished walnut table, was Fields. He extended his hand. No formalities, no overcompensation. "Welcome aboard," he said simply. "You'll be running oversight." I nodded once. That was all that needed to be said. I sat, opened my laptop, and entered the passphrase, 23 characters long. Part code, part memory, part inside joke I hadn't thought of in years. The encryption responded instantly. A window opened with a blinking cursor. I entered the system shell, navigated to the architecture I had designed myself years ago when I was still with Halston and Drake, and activated the lock command. It wasn't revenge, it was procedure. The accounts flagged for investigation were frozen, clean, legal, quiet. The Swiss authorities would handle the rest under international compliance statutes. My job was to secure the doors they had left wide open. I uploaded one final document, a memo addressed to the Global Audit Committee, outlining the structural weaknesses and recommending specific fail-safes. It bore no emotion, no blame, no drama, just strategy, just closure. Fields slid a keycard across the table. "We kept your office untouched," he said, "but there's something else." He led me down the hallway toward the west wing. The door at the end was crafted in dark oak, fitted with an elegant brushed metal nameplate. It read, Breyer Winslow Chief Strategic Compliance Advisor. I paused. "When was this made?" Fields smiled. "The day you got that email. We figured if they didn't see your value, someone else should." I exhaled slowly, hand brushing the metal letters. Not out of sentimentality, but acknowledgement. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to work, to ensure no one else with integrity ever had to watch their legacy erased in silence. I stepped inside the office. It was sleek, minimal, and untouched. But on the windowsill sat something small, an envelope with a familiar looped R on the front. Emery's handwriting. Inside, a single line on a square of paper. "Thank you for showing me how to leave with my head up." I folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. For the first time in months, maybe years. I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. I didn't feel like I was rebuilding. I felt like I had returned to the exact place I was always meant to be. But this time, no longer asking for space. This time, I was the system. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut to make a statement. Sometimes, all it takes is wearing the same gray suit and walking back in through the front door. If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've seen or lived through, leave a comment below. We want to hear your voice. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like Breyer's, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs it today, and hit subscribe, because dignity doesn't end when the contract does. Sometimes, it just begins.